Good morning to those of you in Abidjan and good day to those of you joining us from other parts of the world. Welcome to the fifth in our series of webinar being held by IDEV of the African Development Bank. This is a means of sharing knowledge and fostering an evaluation culture. Now, before we start the webinar, I will mention a few ground rules. First of all, for those of you with very poor bandwidth, you might just switch off your video so that you can get better services. It is also polite to mute your mics. There will be a time where we will all be able to ask questions. In terms of the presentation that is going to be shown, it will be made available to you at the end of the seminar. It will be also hosted on the IDEV website so that you can download it. So do not bother trying to copy notes or trying to capture it while we are conducting the webinar. Now, in terms of asking questions, if you go to the participants icon, you can raise your hand. You can raise your hand and the host will then acknowledge you and unmute you for you to ask questions. Also, for those of you who want, there's also a chat box where you can write your questions and send it to the presenter. Right. Now, let's also be cautious about background noise. Once we unmute your mics, we can hear everything that it's in your background. Now, our topic for today is promoting development effectiveness in MDBs. We're striking a balance between evaluation independence and operational embeddedness. To present the topic is Mr. Eustace Uzo. Eustace joined the bank as a consultant from a research institution. And he is a consultant, and prior to joining the bank, he worked as a senior research fellow at the Center for the Study of Economics of Africa. This is an economic research think tank in Nigeria. He holds a master's degree in development studies and financial economics from the London School of Economics and the University of Essex. He is an alumnus of Harvard Kennedy School's Financial Inclusion Executive Education Program. When I asked him what brought about this topic, he said he wanted to provoke discussion based on people working in operations and where they view evaluation as mostly something that comes at either mid or comes at the end of a project. So without any further ado, I will hand you over to Mr. Eustace.
Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to IDEV's webinar series. Today we'll be discussing, as Daniel pointed out, promoting development effectiveness in multilateral development banks and trying to strike the right balance between evaluation independence and operational embeddedness. And this will be the outline of our discussion today. First, we'll set the stage for the discussion. Secondly, we will discuss the objective of development evaluation, and then we try to discuss striking the right balance between independence and embeddedness, as well as the independence of the evaluation function. Then we'll sort of provoke a discussion. Okay. Before going on, I will try to mute everyone's microphone. Okay. So first, setting the stage, the idea behind this discussion is to provoke a discussion on the topic and to see how we can improve the extent to which we relate with operations, as well as maintain our independence. And so please do feel free to ask questions when you have when something is unclear to you. And so the idea of development evaluation in general is to enhance development effectiveness. And at the bank level, we have the bank's high fives, which are Light Up Africa, Feed Africa, Industrialize Africa, Great Africa. And the fifth high five is Improve the Life of Africans. And in my view, this summarizes all the other four. From the picture, you can see that you have solar panel, solar energy, and of course, electricity is key to improving the quality of life, as well as industrialization and all the other high fives. And on the other side, you see mechanized agriculture, which is moving away from rain-fed agriculture to irrigated farmlands, precision farming, and improved storage. The idea of development evaluation in this sense is to enhance the extent to which we are able to learn lessons and improve the performance of operations of the bank's investments in regional member countries, using the lessons learned through evaluations to improve the next operation down the line. At the global level, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which most of us are very much aware of, on reducing poverty, as well as trying to mitigate the implication of climate change. So I'm going to, one of the misconceptions about evaluation is that
Monsieur Mohamed, bonjour, ça va, famille? Dieu merci. J'avais un reliquat de 2 200 000 à payer. J'ai envoyé en fait mon chauffeur. Il semble que monsieur Fofana ne serait pas là aujourd'hui.
Trying to mute the microphones, please.
À qui je peux remettre? À qui on peut remettre?
C'est un truc de la banque.
Parce que je n'aurais pas souhaité garder la main jusqu'à demain tout de même. D'accord. Donc c'est ouvert demain?
Même toi, peut-être tu as reçu ça. C'est IDEV.
Non, justement, je n'avais pas souhaité. Est-ce que je peux lui envoyer ça par Orange Money?
Et tu n'as pas de mail.
Voilà, moi, consciencieusement, je n'aurais pas souhaité garder jusqu'au jour du résultat, quoi. Il y a eu beaucoup de retard. Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Mute everyone. Please, could you kindly mute your microphones so we can hear each other? Thank you very much. And so I'll resume again. What development evaluation is not. Development evaluation is not policing. The idea behind development evaluation is to improve the results and the performance of the bank's investments. So we are not out to police what colleagues do. And I think this is, in my view, a common misconception about the work of evaluation. So to set the stage, what is evaluation independence? Evaluation function is independent, like in IDEV, which is part of the bank, when it's structurally independent from the operational management and decision-making functions within the organization, so that it's free from any kind of influence towards positive evaluation, and therefore it can be more objective and then has full authority to submit its reports, which says it as it is, to the appropriate levels of decision-making. with respect to IDEV and in the African Development Bank, the reports are submitted to the Committee on Operations and Development Effectiveness to the board. So we submit our reports to the board via coding. And so from this definition, we can collapse the definition or understanding of evaluation independence into two. The first, formal independence, which is very much organizational and can either enable or hinder evaluations. The second one is substantial independence. That is to say, independence should the guiding principles for a good evaluation should be objective, scientific, and impartial. And so there are other elements of substantial independence, such as behavioral independence and protection from outside influence, avoidance of conflict of interest. Please, if you are joining us, kindly mute your microphone. Regardless of being independent, the question is, should the independence of evaluation departments and offices translate to isolation from operations? The general consensus is that this should not be so, since we have channels through which the independence department engage with the operations side of the bank. So, although independence is necessary to ensure high quality and objective evaluation, although independence is necessary to ensure high quality and objective evaluation, it is not, of course, a guarantee for quality evaluation products. And so the idea of institutional independence is to safeguard against biases towards positive evaluation. And so we have to ensure that evaluation is not just formally independent, but also substantially independent. We have to have very strong evaluation design and avoid contract renewal bias and friends bias. So the idea is that these biases are best overcome by having a very good quality assurance system within the bank, within the independent development evaluation. And by quality assurance system, I mean peer review from drafting terms of reference till sharing the technical reports and synthesis reports to a reference group. And of course, the reference group will comprise of colleagues across the operations that are being evaluated, as well as external peer reviewers from institutions such as the World Bank, to make sure that the evaluation findings are evidence-based and they reflect objectivity and is scientific. The question to all of us is, what is the degree of embeddedness with operations that is required to improve evaluation quality and make evaluation recommendations much more actionable? Hopefully, we'll get to answering these questions. As I proceed, when I pose question, please feel free to raise your hand, and I will unmute your mic for you to speak. So in terms of striking the right balance between independence on one hand and embeddedness on one hand, I'm going to discuss the rationale for engaging with operations or embedding ourselves also in the work that operations do. This is the rationale. The rationale is that relating with the operation side of the bank is not only negative, but is also a positive influence. So I would discuss the betterment, undermining, support, and distortion model of influence that was proposed by Pleasure and Seja in 2012. So he recognizes two directions, two broad categories of influence. The first is the direction of influence, which can be destructive and which can be constructive. And then the extent to which influence is explicit. In the direction of influence, we have when influence is distortionary and therefore a negative pressure. And when it's implicit and the direction of influence is undermining, so there's no active involvement to distort an evaluation, but there's sort of a negative persuasion. And then we have the direction of influence that is constructive and better, such as improving the recommendations of evaluation based on correcting errors and making sure that the findings and the evidence through which we draw our findings from and our recommendation to the board is based on evidence and is based on contextual factors. So this is when operations are able to improve the extent to which an evaluation product is of excellent quality. Then we have a situation of support in which the direction of influence is constructive, but again, not very active, very much implicit. Across these quadrants, the most important one is when our IDEVs, independent evaluation offices in multilateral development banks, engage with operations in such a way that it improves the quality of evaluation. To summarize this model, it means that there is a strong reason for independent development evaluation offices in MDBs to engage with operations. The question is, to what extent should these engagements or embedding with operations be? Now, in terms of striking the right balance, let me try to present the current practice in the independent development evaluation of the African Development Bank. And it's important to also keep in mind that these are some of the points that I've noted. IDEV do have a guideline that has been approved by the board. At the end of the presentation, there will be references for everyone that is interested in studying more what IDEV do to go through the references and the reports. And so this is a way that IDEV is structured to still engage with operations. The Evaluator General is constantly invited to senior management meeting through the Senior Management Coordination Committee, SMCC, as well as the Operations Committee, OPSCOM, to ensure that the evidence from evaluation is presented to management and there's a feedback loop between IDEV and senior management of the bank. This is one of the channels, this is one of the formal channels through which the independent development evaluation interacts with the operational side of the bank to organically take into consideration evaluative knowledge and evaluative evidence. And the second one is capitalization workshops. Capitalization workshops is a new product of the department. It aims to, at the end of every evaluation, present the report with the focal department. For instance, the department presented a workshop, a capitalization workshop on agricultural value chain. in which the department that is being evaluated, the senior level, are able to engage in a mutual learning, with the idea being presenting 1 to 2 pages of a management response to the Committee on Operations and Development, CODE. So the idea really is to engage for IDEV, not to sit back, but to engage with the operations side of the bank throughout every evaluation. And like I mentioned earlier, IDEV, throughout the value chain of an evaluation, from originating the terms of reference to constituting the reference group across the focal departments, the key regional member countries that will be visited for country missions, and also to learning events such as the capitalization workshop or any other learning events pertaining to that particular evaluation. So these are the ways in which the Independent Development Evaluation at African Development Bank is able to formally engage with operations. It's important to point out that the first point, which is Evaluator General's engagement with senior level, senior management meetings, goes across other evaluation offices at the World Bank, at the IMF, at IFAD, and all other multilateral and UN agencies such as UNDP. However, even in engaging formally with the management, IDEV staff do recuse themselves from evaluating any project that they have had responsibility for before joining the bank or while in the bank. So this is essentially to avoid conflict of interest and to promote objectivity in evaluations. It's important, however, to note that in contrast to this practice, the Independent Development Evaluation of the Asian Development Bank comments on and reviews very key projects or programs and technical assistance before approval by the bank, by the Asian Development Bank. So while the African Development Bank do not engage in projects or programs when they are originated and when they go to the board for approval, our counterparts in the Asian Development Bank do comment on review, although of course it's not clear how extensive the comments and reviews are. So the question is, the question which hopefully we'll come back to discuss is, what is the degree of embeddedness that is sufficient to maintain independence? And in trying to summarize before we engage into discussion, I'll present what my view is on what my views are on the issue of to what extent evaluation is independent and to what extent evaluation departments engage with operations as well as embed themselves within operations to understand the context for operations. One of my views is that IDEV can review and validate the result frameworks and theories of change of operations and projects at the beginning of the project. One of the main complaints of colleagues in operations is that the work of IDEV comes downstream when a mistake has already been made, and then IDEV's findings and recommendations wouldn't improve the same project, but the next project down the pipeline. And in trying to make this, in trying to conceptualize this view, it's important to note that the Office of Evaluation and Oversight at the Inter-American Development Bank reviews the proposed M&E systems of projects at the design stage rather than waiting around to criticize them once the project is over. This position is the position of Howard White, who used to lead the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. And I think I do agree with this position. Then the second point is rotating young professionals and low to mid-level evaluation staff to operational departments for a few months as part of the onboarding process when these staffs are recruited. The idea behind this is to ensure that there's a balance between outsiders in evaluation department and insiders, and to also ensure that independent development evaluation, the work we do not do it in isolation. It's important to point out that IDEV and other multilaterals do encourage this evaluation staff rotation. However, this is in principle, and it's not clear to me to what extent that this is a systematic process from recruitment of an evaluation officer or a young professional to try and rotate to other operational departments of the bank, such as energy, private sector development, to gain an understanding of the challenges in which these operational activities of the bank in regional member countries are situated. And so the point is, and this is a question to everyone, is independence preferred over influence? We know that as part of IDEV's mission is to provide independent evaluations and influential evaluations. The question is, to what extent can you influence when you don't embed yourself in the work of people in operations? And so, thank you very much for your time. And now we will open up the webinar for questions, and I'm excited to answer your questions. Thank you.
Policy is our procurement policy, which gives guidelines as to what can be. And the third line is our disbursement. If they did it first time, for example, we cannot say the project is 1 million, we give you 1 million. No. We say we give you 20%. When you did this, do that, and we will not disburse the next. So minimize our losses. So even if they are going to pay trees, we have either our procurement policy, which was approved by the board in 2015, 2014, I think 2015, and our disbursement counterbalance, which help us to say, so we can afford to let the national system take it. As long as we operate here, and if they say, but you guys are not doing it, no, we say we are coming up with the organizational value, which we are saying, remember recourse mechanisms, remember that one, to say consequence management. So we say, oh, we've already got the recourse mechanism, we are working with them, and we are working on consequence management. What happens if you do what you are not consequence management? What you are not supposed to be doing, and you do, what happens? So you can see all.
Okay, I think I've lost the speaker. If the speaker can please do repeat what you said so that colleagues can hear you. And so before we go ahead, perhaps I should ask for the view of other participants before I discuss the question. Okay, so while we wait for our colleagues to continue their discussion, I wanted to quickly say that what is our view on the extent to which the independent development evaluation can interact with colleagues in the operational part of the bank without compromising the extent to which the department is independent.
Okay, while we are waiting, let me ask Uzo, how will this embeddedness, how will it manifest itself practically in terms of if we are embedding, what do you call it, an evaluator? What are the nuts and bolts of it?
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel, for the question. I think that one way to do this is to, when you recruit an evaluation officer, you try to expose the evaluation officer to the context of the bank, the context of operations. Supposing, for instance, that the evaluation officer was recruited for IDEV 1 or IDEV 2. IDEV 1 evaluates just for our colleagues that are participating. IDEV 1 evaluates largely private sector operations, such as lines of credit, the power sector, climate change, and public-private PPPs in general. And IDEV 2 evaluates corporate evaluations, such as the human resource policy of the bank, agriculture, like agricultural value chain, human and social development. So if the department recruits a consultant for IDEV 1 or IDEV 2, they can be exposed to the specific operations, the specific departments that carry the operations that he would eventually evaluate. And he does not, the evaluation officer do not need to stay there for a long time. It could just be to understand the challenges, to understand how the operational departments arrive at a theory of change. The idea being that it would be much more useful for an evaluator to understand the context of a project, and of course, much more able to contribute to the extent to which evaluation department is agile in responding to the challenges of projects of our colleagues in the operational parts of the bank. So this is what I think. It can also be done the other way. We can also have colleagues from operations come to evaluation departments for a couple of months to understand what IDEV looks out for in a project, and to think about those problems and those challenges from the inception of a project when they go back to their respective departments. So do you have any thoughts on these issues? Okay.
Thanks, Eustace, for your presentation.
Okay, please, could you say your name, please?
Eric.
Eric.
IDEV 2 consultant. I would like to point out another responsibility of independent evaluation in the specific case of the African Development Bank, which is to validate project completion reports. It is also a great opportunity to learn from bank's operation and to share feedback and comments with operation departments. So I think there is a gap there to also fill, because from what I know, I'm not sure that those kind of learning workshop based on validation of PCR has been conducted so far. It is also a good pattern to explore in terms of learning, in terms of knowledge sharing, in order to improve operation department.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eric. I think that your position that IDEV's ability to validate project completion reports, just to put it this way, project completion reports are self-evaluations by operations which are validated by independent development evaluation independently. So one of the responsibilities of the department is to validate the self-evaluations of operations. And I agree with what you say, that important IDEV to share feedback and take into considerations comments from operations for knowledge sharing. The question, however, is to what is the thin line between sharing knowledge and engagement without compromising independence and yet improving quality. So what do other colleagues think? So while we wait for colleagues, I would like to ask this question. Okay. So you can also, just note, please, you can also send questions via chat. And okay, let me go through the questions and respond. And I'm sorry, we can't translate to French at the moment. Please do bear with us. In future, hopefully we will be able to have both an English presentation and a French presentation. And this is what we are actively working towards. Okay. Thank you very much, Matthew, for your point. I'll be happy if you can raise your hand and we can unmute your mic and you can ask your question and we can respond to it, as well as other colleagues. We have a number of colleagues here to also respond to your questions. Okay, Daniel Alonso, thank you very much for your question. So your question is how can IDEV validate a theory of change without compromising a possible conflict of interest? So first, I will ask, are there any thoughts on this question from colleagues that are logged into the webinar? Your mics have been unmuted, so please feel free to speak up. So absent intervention from colleagues, I think that for me, this is the reason why I agreed to make this presentation, to provoke our thoughts, to understand what the gray areas are. Obviously, my view and my position is that we are doing the work we do to improve development effectiveness. And so independence should not be an end, but a means to an end. And the end is to improve the additionality, the effectiveness, and the results of what the bank is doing in regional member countries. And the question is, if we focus on the goal, how can we marry these two together? how can we validate and I guess it's maybe the conflict of interest will be when IDEV develops a theory of change for a particular project, in my view, and now tries to validate it at the downstream of the project. But if IDEV can validate or suggest or comment on a theory of change based on our own understanding of what is important for development effectiveness and development results, perhaps that could be the line to toe. So, Daniel Alonso, please get back to us on what you think on this.
Yes, hello. This is Matthew. Can you hear me now?
Yes, please. Matthew. Please
yes.
go ahead.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I'm with the Climate Change and Green Growth Department.
Okay.
This is an issue that we're looking at very closely right now. But I wanted to ask if the ultimate goal is from evaluation is not just to carry out evaluation for the sake of evaluation, but in fact, we're trying to use evaluation as a tool in order to improve development effectiveness. Then to me, the question of structure here and how embedded versus independent should the function be is important. But I think another really important question is to look at the incentives within the project cycle already, and particularly the task managers, because the task managers have the ultimate responsibility for these projects. And I mean, we can have the most rigorous independent evaluations. We can have the most rigorous evaluations with influence and operational embeddedness. But what do you make of the actual incentive structure based on the results of evaluations and how projects are actually performing relative to these, concrete on the ground findings from evaluations, and how the takeaway from that is embedded then into the core project cycle and also larger, higher up decision-making structures?
Okay, thank you very much, Matthew, for your question. I think that is an important question, and just to say that in IDEV we don't do evaluation for evaluation sake. We do evaluation to improve the usefulness of. We provide useful recommendations to improve operations, like you are in climate change and green growth department. So I suppose your projects will be evaluated by colleagues in IDEV 1. To answer your question about the incentive structure in the project cycle, I think that you are right. To a large extent, there may be some perverse incentives that tax managers face when originating a project, and like you know, the much more stronger incentive to submit projects to the board for approval. And I have to be quite frank with you, this is an issue that we try to find solutions to, and perhaps the best way to proceed is to ask everyone what they think, and then I could try to provide my own thoughts at the end of the discussion. So, any colleague with any answer to any silver bullet to the points noted by Matthew from Climate Change and Green Growth Department? Okay. So I would quickly go back to Daniel Alonso before discussing my thoughts or sharing my thoughts about Matthew's points. So on my own part, Daniel, I think that IDEV can comment and validate without having to compromise to have a possible conflict of interest, since the point is you don't own the project. You see, you don't. This is not your project, so I think you don't have any incentive to give a positive, to have a positive bias at the time of evaluation. You are basically commenting, and perhaps we can take a cue from the academic research community. You know, when you submit a when you submit a paper for peer review in a publication, it has to be brought up to a particular standard, and then you can provide comments to essentially strengthen the quality and the strength of the paper. And my view is that colleagues are very interested to get comment from reviewers so that they can strengthen the quality of their papers. And I think something similar can be applicable, particularly since we are dealing with large amounts of money in a portfolio, and the implication of such investment to ordinary people in regional member countries is quite significant. So I think that we have to find a common ground in having a look at the terms of the theory of change or results framework during the origination of a project. But the point is, and this is much more of an internal question, is IDEV well positioned from a human resource perspective to provide this kind of service to the operation side of the department, of the bank rather. So anyone has any thoughts on this?
I have a question in regards to what you just mentioned. In addition to the human resource implication, which I assume you're mentioning more on the procurement side, what about the time? I mean, I think it requires a lot of time and preparation to be able to allow evaluators to mingle effectively and efficiently with the operations department. Because if you limit the amount of time, then the learning that you want them to have becomes a bit restricted.
Okay, Nanu, do you mind repeating your last sentence? I understand that you are trying to discuss with how is time an important factor in this whole mix, if I get it correctly.
Exactly. I mean, because you've mentioned about the human resource issue, which it has to be taken into account, but there's also the procurement process and the time, because as far as I'm concerned, evaluations sometimes are time bound. So taking into account a time-bound activity and also the time required for people to move evaluators between the evaluation department and the operation. What degree do you think time should be taken into account as a factor?
Okay, Nanu, thank you for your very interesting question. I think that the first point, the beginning should be agreeing to this. I think my view is that if this idea is debated and discussed within the highest level of the bank's management, I think that timelines can be aligned. My understanding is that if someone in operations has to engage with someone in evaluation department, if the person should, which means that colleagues originating projects would start it at an earlier stage, maybe 1 month ahead of time. And maybe this can also be taken into consideration with regards to procurement rules and the sittings for approval of these projects. So I think the most important thing is to very much agree on what is the level of involvement of IDEV and integration with operations, and how can the timeline be threatened out with procurement, our colleagues in procurement. So Nanu, do you have any comments, or what are your thoughts? How do you think that your suggestion how do you think that the challenge posed by your question can be resolved?
Actually, I am satisfied with the answer you provided. Just that I assumed one of the problems that the bank has is always the procurement process, which requires a lot of time. And as far as I'm concerned, nobody would say that the timeline has yet to be perfected. So I'm just wondering, when you have to take that into account, in addition to time-bound evaluation, in addition to embeddedness, how effective can we streamline the process? Because I think it's an efficient process that could lead to better results, but I'm just wondering how it could be implemented effectively, taking into account the time.
Okay. In the grand scheme of things, it's my hope that these issues and this provides much more rationale for the bank and for IDEV to have these discussions. For instance, with colleagues in procurement, what are the implications? And so if we have a good idea of what the implications are for IDEV, for procurement, as well as for operations, then I think that there can be a common ground. And with that, the board will be much more understanding that if we spend much more time in originating a project and strengthening it, much more likely that the project will have much stronger quality at entry, and of course achieve its development results at the end. So I'll quickly go to Matthew's points. Matthew, thank you for the question. I think that most times the tax managers are actually very busy, and sometimes it's very difficult to balance their KPIs as well as engaging with evaluation. One of the ways that I've thought, and this is my view, is integrating engagements with IDEV in the KPIs of tax managers, so that you know that you're not spending your time, that you're not going to be evaluated on at the end of the year, but your extent to which you relate to IDEV can be beneficial for your own career as well. And in which case, there's much more incentive for you to have a much more positive disposition, engaging with colleagues in IDEV. And aside from that, it's a bit tricky how the incentive faced by tax managers at the origination stage and the rather strong focus on approvals and disbursement vis-a-vis the quality of the theory of change and results framework, and in general quality at entry. I think that this is a discussion that should be held much more in the bank, and I think it's a problem that is beyond the evaluation department. I think it's a bank-wide issue, and issues that other multilateral development banks face as well. And so I think that there's a need to rethink the incentive structure facing tax managers and our colleagues in operations, so that we can improve development results as well as improve their advancement in their careers.
Eustace, I would be pleased if you can share. You know, it's always good from what I get that the Islamic Development Bank has kind of gone a bit further ahead in terms of embeddedness. If you can share any that they, or practices that they use, maybe that would be enlightening.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel, for your point. Just to say that it's an Inter-American Development Bank and not Islamic Development Bank. Just to correct that. And from what I know and the reference here, if colleagues can go to slide number, to the slide on my view, and this is what is being done at the Office of Oversight, which is evaluation at the Inter-American Development Bank. And this also relates to the question of Daniel Alonso on whether IDEV's participation in validating theories of change or M&E is a compromise on conflict of interest. And we can clearly see that the Office of Evaluation at the Inter-American Development Bank reviews proposed M&E systems of projects at the design stage. So it's not as though this practice is not in place. Of course, many institutions are unique and their focus are rather different. And I also understand that from evaluations guiding principles of OECD and DAC, maintaining independence, avoiding conflict of interest is one of the guiding principles. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we focus on development results and development effectiveness and not necessarily on dwelling so much on independence. So to the point of Daniel, yes, I do not know exactly the nitty-gritties of what the Inter-American Development Bank does, but I'm hoping to write a short blog post which will be circulated, to colleagues, where I can contact colleagues at the Inter-American Development Bank and ask them what are the issues they face, how do they do this, and how do they maintain their independence while also contributing to projects at the design stage. So we have three minutes and 3 minutes to round up, and like Daniel pointed out earlier, the slides will be available for everyone. The discussion is very much ongoing. So please, for colleagues at the African Development Bank, you can send me an email. And for other colleagues as well, when the slides are shared, my email will be there as well, in case you want to follow up on questions that you have. So we'll have a couple of 2 minutes now. I'll be happy to for people to say something and contribute to the discussion.
In order to mitigate the risk of conflict of interest, Daniel points out in terms of providing comments on project theory of change or logical framework. I think that at least IDEV could provide comments on high-level core sector indicator, not specifically related to a project, but at the sectoral level. I think that IDEV would have his a possibility, a possible conflict of interest. We can continue the discussion here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric, for your points. I think that that is one way to go. Just that it's important to note that from my own experience, projects are unique, and I don't know to what extent that a global theory of change can be used for specific projects, but I think it's something worth thinking about. We have 1 minute, and we'll close. We'll end the webinar. And so, please, we have a minute, so someone can make a contribution or try to react to any points that has been raised. Okay, so in the absence of questions, thank you very much, colleagues, for your time, your valued time, and I hope that you learned 1 or 2 things from the discussion, and I'll be excited to continue engaging on this very important topic. I'll try and put up a blog post on our discussion and reflect the comments and views of our colleagues. So thank you very much for your participation, and we hope to talk to you soon in another IDEV webinar series, which will come up soon. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for presenting this webinar. I think this has been novel in that it has tried to be provocative and foster discussion. We hope to keep innovating. So please join us next month when we have our next webinar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.